course, shaping the way we teach English. Webinar Wednesday.
Welcome to Shaping the Way We Teach English Webinar Course 14, brought to you by the American English team. My name is Jennifer Hodgson, also known as Moderator Jenny. Welcome teachers from all around the world. Here you can see the Course 14 schedule, with today's webinar being the 5th webinar of Course 14. We hope you'll be able to join us for the last webinar in 2 weeks. And in case you missed any, you can also view the recordings on our NING site, the American English website, and on our AE YouTube channel. I think most of you know this by now, but just a few reminders. During these webinars, you will hear but not see the presenter. The way for you to participate is by using the chat box, as you are already doing. And this is where you can ask questions or make comments related to today's topic. Your presenter may also ask you questions in the form of polls. These will be multiple choice questions that will appear on your screen for you to answer. You'll also see myself, Moderator Jenny, and Moderator Heather in the chat box to assist you. Some people may experience technical problems, and unfortunately we cannot fix individual technical issues, but we will let you know if we're having a global issue. If you do lose sound, a great way to follow along is with the caption pod that you see in the right or the bottom left corner. Webinar courses consist of 6 webinars, and during the course, the webinars take place every other Wednesday. If you attend at least 4 out of 6 webinars, you'll receive an e-certificate from your regional English language officer or local U.S. embassy. At the very end of the webinar, we will ask you to submit your attendance by typing your email address into the specific attendance box. Please do not submit it before we request it, or it will not be counted. And here's the NING site, which we hope you are all familiar with. This is where you can ask the presenter additional questions after the webinar, and you can also access the recordings as well as all of the readings and resources. If you have not visited this site before, you will need to register, and your membership will be approved within approximately 2 days. So now on to today's webinar. Welcome to Using Comics in the EFL Classroom, brought to you by the American English team. Using comics in the classroom is a terrific way to incorporate the target language in a fun and engaging way. This webinar will demonstrate the use of comics for any English classroom, showing how multi-skill comic activities can be used with students of all ages and ability levels. You will experience several materials you can use in your own classrooms, and you will learn how to use comics as an effective, real-world formative assessment measure and as a springboard for vocabulary and grammar acquisition. Our presenter today is James Whiting, and he has over 25 years of experience in TESOL as a teacher and teacher trainer. He is an associate professor of applied linguistics, the coordinator of the graduate TESOL program, and the chair of the Department of Languages and Linguistics at Plymouth State University in New Hampshire. James's professional experience includes teaching English overseas, teaching English at the City University of New York, and teaching in graduate TESOL programs at New York University and Concordia University. He was a senior English language fellow in Russia and a Fulbright scholar in Panama. James received his MA in TESOL from Columbia University and his PhD in applied linguistics from New York University. He is also the past president of Northern New England TESOL. So before we get started, there's just one note. Please make sure that you have a pen or pencil and some paper during today's webinar. If you don't have those nearby, please get them now. And welcome to James.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. Yeah. Greetings from New Hampshire, New England. How many of you know where New England is? Can you use the raise the hand feature for that? If you know where New England is, can you just lift up your hand? Little man on the upper right there. Yeah, New England. So New England is the upper right-hand side of the United States. Is that right? And northeast corner of the United States. And that's where I'm sitting here this afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully this will be an interesting and lively discussion, and you'll get lots of things out of this, and you'll come out of this webinar raring to go with using comics in your classroom and looking for ways of bringing this really rich, meaningful material readily available into your own rooms. So one of the questions we asked you was ahead of time whether or not you like comics and if you have used them in your own classroom. So I was just noticing that there was overwhelmingly people liked comics. We had 94% of the folks of participants choosing that they liked comics. And but a more even split on the second question, have you used them in your own classroom? So we have about a 52-48 split there. So some folks have, some folks haven't. About half of you have, half of you haven't. And so let's hope that at the end of this, people who have used them will have other ways of bringing it in additionally. And those of you who haven't will be excited and motivated to start using this resource in your rooms with your students. Okay. Good. So let's look at a little outline of where we'll go this afternoon. And it is this afternoon where I'm sitting, so I'll just use that. And I understand it was a little time difference for some of you because we changed our clocks here in the U.S. last weekend. So we'll talk about what we'll look at with this presentation today. We'll begin by looking at 3 slides, which will answer the question, the first question there, why use comics? Why should we use them? Why use them in our classrooms? So we'll get a good understanding of 3 different reasons, larger reasons. We'll spend a lot of time with classroom usage. So we'll figure out ways of taking these resources into our rooms, ways for us to use these for grammar and for vocabulary and for reading and writing, listening, speaking, and assessment, all sorts of different ways for us to take this fun resource into our rooms with our students. We'll talk a little bit about pragmatic intelligence. Obviously, comics connected with pragmatics in the sense that pragmatics is about humor to an extent, and there's also aspects of appropriate responses and politeness that can be gotten out of looking at comics as well. So there's lots of pragmatics embedded within the use of comics. Comics will also help us with that intercultural competence piece that we're looking for in our classrooms. That's oftentimes difficult to get at. Sometimes it's harder than other times. And this gives us an opportunity to look at cultural competence and to increase students' cultural competence, something that they like to have. And so we get not just the linguistic aspect of it, but we also get that intercultural competence piece. We'll talk about assessment towards the end of the presentation and the importance of using these kinds of resources for assessment, because instruction and assessment are so intricately lined up and connected in a good language classroom that we're not just teaching and then several classes later testing. We're teaching, testing at the same time. We're assessing constantly with our students informally, formative assessment measures, small-term assessment measures, and we can look at ways that we can do that with comics, these rich resources for us. And lastly, what we'll do this afternoon is we'll look at resources. So we'll look at some sites, some of which are already on the Ning, and we'll talk about others that you can go to access these resources and take them into your room. Okay, so At the end of the day, this is what we'll have done, and I'm hoping that we'll all walk out of here well-informed and ready to use these resources. Okay, so let's talk about why. Let's talk about that first question of why. And I've broken down the why to 3 different parts. The first part is affect. Why use comics? Affect. And that affect piece is that affective filter that Krashen talked about so many years ago, and that we're looking to lower that, to bring that level of anxiety, that level of inhibition, that level of fear that students may or may not have to a certain degrees and to a certain extent in our classrooms, that we're looking to lessen that, to bring that down in our rooms, and to up the fun factor, to up the fun quotient, to make students want to be there, to increase, therefore, their motivation, that underlying motivation that we can get at by making our classrooms more enjoyable. And that through that enjoyment, they are going to be ideally more inclined and more readily accessible to the language input that we're giving them. So why use them? That fun factor. That's really what it's about, in my opinion. It's about that positively impacting on motivation, that increasing the fun, that allowing for creativity so that students are feeling like they can do with the target language what they might be able to do with their home language. That is to say, be creative, to be active, authentic language learners, language users. And I think we can get at all of that through using comics in our classroom. And then, in addition to that, we get that target language cultural piece, which students so often want. They crave that. They're looking for access into the target language culture. It's going to also lower that distance that they may feel between their home culture, their home language, and the target language culture, and so that we're looking to narrow that gap. And one way that we can narrow that gap and therefore increase the likelihood that they become active language learners is by making them feel more connected to the target language culture. And I think we can do that quite easily with comics. The other reason why we would use them is language, when we're language teachers. And so language teachers are looking for ways to teach language and to teach it, to bring in that authentic language, to bring in language of the real world, to look for avenues and access into the target language that may be somewhat alternative and that students will be receptive to. So it's also going to help us bring in that higher level linguistic competence piece that we talked about a few minutes ago, so that we'll be looking at not just their linguistic abilities, but their pragmatic intelligence as well. It lends itself very nicely to expansion, so that we're not just necessarily bringing in a comic, but we're bringing in a comic as a springboard for all sorts of other interesting, fun, dynamic activities in our room, so that we could use a comic as a springboard for a role play, or we could use a comic as a springboard for a free writing activity, or for a listening, speaking activity, which of course would be a role play, but others as well. We could use it as a springboard for an assessment measure. So there's all sorts of ways that we can take a relatively small artifact, like a comic, with limited linguistic input and not a lot of things going on, and do many different things with it in our classroom that will be, will allow us to mine that, it'll be a rich resource for us and give us many things back. And it will give us students that springboard into the language, so that we're giving them this little thing and then they're taking that and they're running with it. And we'll see examples of that in a few minutes. And I think it's important to remember that this is a small chunk of language in many cases with comics. And that can be to our benefit. That can certainly be to our benefit as language teachers at all sorts of levels, in particular with students who are at a more beginning level of language ability. Because that small chunk of language is going to lessen the inhibitions. It's not going to be so big, and it's not going to be monolithic. It won't be too big for students to get into. They will see 10, maybe 15 or fewer words on a page, maybe much fewer than that, and they will see their own access point into that. So the linguistic range is limited, the syntactic range is limited, the vocabulary is limited, and that we're going to be able to get, therefore, into that language through that limited sphere that we're giving students. And of course, the language will be in context and it will be authentic. And we'll see that in a few seconds when we start looking at some of them. So we're getting real world language. And so we're getting at reduced speech. We're getting contractions. We're getting that colloquial language, all of which students are looking for, which will make students feel like they're really engaging at a strong linguistic level with the target language, so that it's authentic speech of the real world that they can then employ in their own authentic use of language. So we're giving them that springboard into the target language. Lastly, in terms of why we use comics, about pedagogy. We're teachers, and so we're interested in good pedagogy. We're interested in being good teachers and about having good, strong, communicative, interactive, student-centered language classrooms. And we have undoubtedly heard the mantra of student-centered and making classrooms communicative, and that's sometimes harder to put into place than just saying the words. So this gives us a real-world, concrete example of how we can be those communicative language teachers, those student-centered language teachers, by giving students opportunities to negotiate meaning, to work together with one another, to create a comic, to do many of the activities that we'll be looking at in a few moments, these group activities that we could be doing, these activities such as filling in the blanks or writing dialogue. These can all be done with other students. They can become team and group projects, all of which allows us that backdoor into the target language, that language of using the target language for communication, for getting at the work of the classroom, so that we are giving ourselves multiple ways, multiple opportunities to promote those higher level thinking skills of analysis and synthesis and target language usage to create the work of the classroom. So hopefully we understand why we want to use it, pedagogically, linguistically, and also the larger, more hard to pinpoint, but really important aspect of classroom culture, that is to say, a good, fun, interesting place to be. Okay, good. So why don't we now talk about a few ways of bringing them into the classroom. We'll talk, and then we'll get our pens ready, and we'll actually practice a few. Okay. As language teachers, the foundations, the building blocks of what we do in the classroom are vocabulary and grammar. And these are what language is about, and at the underneath level. And without vocabulary, without grammar, students have a hard time being communicative. So we need to work on building these skills, and we all have taught vocabulary and we've all taught grammar, and some more effectively than others, and at times better than others. And these are, when we're talking about it today, we can look at comics as a way to bring in these two foundational pieces of our language classrooms at a real fundamental way and fundamental level that students will both appreciate and enjoy, and that will aid and assist in their acquisition process. So we are getting here vocabulary and grammar that's got visual support. This is one of the truly terrific things about using comics, is that we have that visual support piece that goes on there. So students are not just getting language, they're getting a visual scaffold into the language as well. They're getting language that is idiomatic and reduced, as I said, in many cases, colloquial language, and they're also getting slang. And slang, there's nothing wrong with slang. Slang is part of the vocabulary, the fluid, active vocabulary that students will want to learn, not obviously to the exclusion of other vocabulary, but it should be part of our package of vocabulary that we're giving students, and students will want that. So we're all familiar with closed activities. Closed activities are one of these tried and true language classroom procedures, and they have real benefits for us in many different ways. They can be used as very good, quick assessment tools for students and for us to see what our learning and our teaching is going on, to see how well we're teaching, how well they're learning. They can be really outstanding ways for us to isolate and practice specific grammar and vocabulary items. So closed activity, we would remove one or maybe more than one word from a panel and it might be tied in specifically with a vocabulary item that we've been teaching, which we'll look at next. Or it might be grammatical close, so that we're looking at taking out a particular syntactic feature that we are interested in having students highlight and then practice through that highlighting. For students who are somewhat less advanced, we can scaffold into this by giving them the choice of words, so we wouldn't take out an entire blank without giving them options for 2 or 3 choices to use for that blank. We might, for higher levels, ask students to go for more than just the word level, but the sentence level, or maybe even the discourse level, so that they're taking out an entire sentence or an entire bubble. So let's take a look at one of these if we can. I'm going to pull up a comic in just the next slide. So you're going to need to pull out your typing hands or your pens and paper. And we're going to look at this slide, and then we're going to engage with it. Okay, let's do that now. Okay, so let's just take a moment to take in a visual. If we just look at it by themselves for just a second and see it and read it and take in the message of the strip. And what we're seeing here is an American comic strip that you may or may not be familiar with, but if you aren't, this is your introduction to it. It's an American comic strip called Garfield. Garfield is the name of this animal here, this cat here, this pet cat, this house cat. And he's got a friend, a human over there to the far right, bottom right. His human is called... oh gosh, I forget now, whatever. That's his human to the right. And so we have Garfield walking in here, and Garfield is got his little front paws together. Yes, so and I've been told that his name is John. Thank you. So John is his friend, and Garfield is the cat. And so Garfield is walking in here, and he's got his little front paws, and he's rubbing himself to keep warm, and you can see the breath here, his little exhalations there, you can see that. And he goes up to his coffee, and he's splashing it, and he's sipping it, and he's gargling it, and he's gulping it, and then he gets in it. And then he puts his front paws in over here, and then he gets his hind backside into it over here, and he says, ah. And then his friend John says to him, you really blank your coffee, don't you, Garfield? Question mark. So we have 3 blanks. The first up here, and I'm going to ask you to take a moment to fill in these blanks. So we have the oh boy blank, and then the second one, the that feels so blank, and then the third one is the you really enjoy, I'm sorry, you really blank your coffee, don't you? Oops. So let's see if we can try the 3 different boxes there, okay? Okay, so I'm seeing lots of cold and freezing, and folks are saying good and warm and great for the middle, and love for the back one, like, enjoy. In the middle, I'm seeing folks say good and warm, cold. Good. So we could have all sorts of possibilities for these boxes, right? It's freezing, right? And let's go back to so we have lots of different sugary. Ooh, good and nice. Okay, excellent. Let's go back to the slide itself and take a second to look at this together. We could have, I'm looking for the pointer here, I don't see it. Can we get the pointer? We could have many different things in this first box. Obviously, we're looking for something that has to do with cold. And so he could be saying cold or freezing or chilly or nippy, slightly more idiomatic words like nippy or chilly, or as so many of you said, cold or freezing. So the idea is that he's cold And then we have this terrific onomatopoeic language. The sounds and the word are the same. And so this is the way it sounds. This is the way it looks. I'm sorry, this is the way it comes out. It's written. Sipping and gargling and gulping. And you can imagine in a classroom with the right kinds of students and the right age that this would be a terrific thing to act out and to have fun with and to get students out of their seats and to be in, to actually engage with. And then he gets into it, and we could have, and I saw many people say, it feels good, or it feels nice, or comforting, or soothing, or comfortable, or warm. Yes, many people said warm, said another one. And he's enjoying the feel of it too here. Yes, he's getting his fat cat body into it. And now he's completely submerged in it. Only his neck is showing, and his friend is saying enjoy, or like, or love. But we could also be more idiomatic here. We could use words like get into, right? Get into, because he's literally getting into his coffee, but he's also, when you say somebody gets into it, it means what in English? It means that they like it, that they're enjoying it. So you're getting into it. Or you might use a more idiomatic expression like you really dig your coffee, right? So I mean, this could be an opportunity for lots of different vocabulary here that's both colloquial and that students may or may not know or may not see. But the really nice thing about this and about all of these kinds of activities is that they're all correct, which is really what we need to be teaching students, that there's no correct answer with or incorrect answer with these. I mean, we could, I guess, be completely outlandish and have really wrong words, but as long as it's within the framework of cold, this should work. So freezing and nippy and cold are all good there, and good and nice and warm and soothing, they're all perfectly acceptable there. Dig or into or like or love, these are all good here. And students will see this and understand this is just like the home language, that they are getting here an opportunity to practice and play around with the multiple layers of correction, that this could all be correct and that you don't have one right or wrong answer when you are within the ballpark or within the framework of the message of the strip. It gives students an opportunity to be creative and also to see reduced speech. We see that here. We see contractions. We see him playing around. It can also be an opportunity for students to, I see someone talk about a role play. Yeah, this would be a terrific role play. Somebody from Cyprus wrote that. And the idea that you could also see students using this as a springboard for a writing activity, maybe their own morning routine or their own morning drink, whether that's hot or cold, or maybe that changes as one gets older. Maybe you drink different things. Or your own morning food rituals. And so this is this gives you all of that, and it gives you all of that in something very, very simple. And let's just take a look at the next strip, which is the filled in blanks. So we have the word chilly here. He's using the word chilly. He's using the word warm, and he's using the word enjoy. Okay? And what we see with this is that with something in the neighborhood of less than 10 words. This is not a lot of language here. You're getting a really great springboard into the language, into an opportunity for students to manipulate and to work with the target language. So I want to just draw your attention to the website here. This is from Garfield.com, which is the website where I got this from. And Garfield.com, it has daily strips. So, and many of these comics that I'm looking at with you today, I'm looking at 3 different ones, are going to have these websites where you can access free, easily strips that you can take into your classroom and use with your students. So Garfield.com has got a daily strip, and it obviously changes every day, and they're all in color, and they're usually the same kind of linguistic load as what we're looking at here. Not a lot of vocabulary, not a lot of words, not a lot of deep structure, but opportunities for you to take this into your classroom with your students, full color, then playing around with it. And you can go back and look at the daily strips, from days gone by, and look for syntactic features that you may be teaching in your room. For example, you might be teaching adjectives, in which case you've got 3 options with this strip that I've just given you. Good. So let's take a look at another American comic strip. This one's slightly different, but also well known, and a similar idea where we're going to take out just a little bit of the comic and have students engage with it. But we would be looking at this one as more of a syntactic or grammatical structure. Okay, so let's take a look at this strip for just a second. Everybody just take a moment to read it, to see it, and to take it in. And this one is, we're going to look at the grammar here with the 4 boxes. So here you have another American strip. This one is also quite famous and well known. It's called Calvin and Hobbes. And this boy here is Hobbes. I'm sorry. This boy here is Calvin. Excuse me. This boy here is Calvin, and Hobbes is not in this picture here. Calvin is by himself here. Hobbes is his animal, his stuffed tiger. Only comes to life with him, and we'll see him in a few minutes. So here we have this little boy, Calvin, standing on the side of the road with his lunchbox next to him, waiting for the school bus, it looks like. And he says, I don't want to catch the bus. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to be here at all. So that repetition of that same exact structure there, I don't want to. I'm sick of everyone, so that's nice. Idiomatic speech, that's colloquial speech. This is what American kids would say. I'm sick of everyone telling me what to do all the time. I hate my life. I hate everything. I wish blank blank. And then he has a moment where he thinks about what's going on. He thinks what he just said, and he says, well, no, I don't really. No, I don't, not really. I wish everyone else blank blank. So if we were teaching, for example, in our classes, the wish clause, which is what this is, with the verb to be, we might incorporate this in our classrooms as a way of bringing in that syntactic structure, that grammatical feature. And we could, I wish we could fill this in. So why don't we take a moment right now to see what people have come up with here. Just type this into the chat box. I see, I wish I were God. I wish I lived somewhere else. So I wish I would disappear. Very nice. I wish I were dead. Okay. I wish I was dead. Okay, good. So we're looking at this, and it's not a lot of language. And then let's take a look at what he does fill in here, and then use this as a learning opportunity in our classrooms. Okay, so now we can see that I wish I was dead, and I wish everyone else was dead. Now, English teachers that you are, many of you are probably scratching your heads and saying, was? What's that? Why is that there? And that's a good question, right? Why is he saying was dead and not were dead? Were dead, of course, is correct. That's the correct. If you look in the grammar books, that's going to teach you I wish I were dead. Not so we're using were there and not was. Now, why would this little 7-year-old boy or 6-year-old boy be using was versus were? That could be a really nice opportunity to talk about that in your classrooms with your students. And it could also be an opportunity for you to get at a very high-level discussion about the fluidity of language, about the fact that English, as all languages do, changes over time, and that what is correct with quotation marks around it may become antiquated or not correct or become passé or out of fashion or out of style or out of usage. And I think what we're seeing with was and were with that if clause with this with I is very much something that's changing in English right now, so that not everyone is using were. Many people are using was, and this is also register. It's levels of formality and levels of of who you're working with. So we could teach students, and we could be having a discussion with students, and they will recognize this as something that's true in their own languages, that language is fluid and that grammatical correction is going to perhaps change over time. You can see this with like who and whom. Who and whom, the distinction between who and whom in English is fading fast. And many people do not use whom at all. And so this is a similar kind of grammatical feature that is going out of, maybe not going out of style is not correct. I mean, certainly many people are going to say were in this case, but it's an opportunity for that conversation in your class. Okay. Let's take another look at another one. And I don't want to point you out the website here. This is where I got this one from, and there's another Calvin and Hobbes site in a few minutes when we look at another Calvin and Hobbes, okay? Jigsaws. We've all probably done jigsaws or know about jigsaws in our classroom. If we haven't, this is an opportunity for us to bring jigsaws into our room. Jigsaws are a outstanding resource for us. They don't require a lot of preparation for a lot of linguistic bang for your buck. You can get a lot out of a jigsaw. The communicative piece there, the communication piece, the information gap piece, all of this is rich linguistic territory that students will appreciate, and that once again you're bringing in a very small artifact and you're giving students this handheld, this manipulables, this tactile piece of language, and they are going to play around with that and they're going to create their own meaning. Again, it factors into this what is correct. So what we'll see in just a few moments is that there could be multiple corrections. So you could cut something up and you could ask students to put it back in the correct order. And the correct order may be different. There may be multiple interpretations of what is correct, and then students can justify their correction, why they want certain things in that order. So it promotes that analysis, that evaluation, that synthesis piece, all of those higher level thinking skills that Benjamin Bloom talked about in the 1950s. I mean, I'm referring to Bloom's taxonomy when I say things like higher level thinking skills. Benjamin Bloom was an educational theorist in the U.S. in the 1950s who put forth this idea that the kinds of thinking that go on in classroom situations can be put into a hierarchy. And the higher level ones, this analysis, this evaluation, and synthesis, are the ones that we should be shooting for as much as possible. So we could also see sequencing in place here and the use of the target language when it's done in groups. So we're giving students something to hold on to, we're asking them to put it into the right order and then to explain why. Let's take a look at one of these, and then we will attempt it ourselves, okay? So we're all ready here. This is going to be a poll, I believe. I think that's how it's going to come out. And we're looking at 4 boxes here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are not necessarily the order that they are in when they were produced. So let's see what that poll looks like. Okay, so we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and I'm going to ask you to choose which one you think is correct. Is the order 1, 3, 4, 2, or is the order 3, 4, 2, 1? And think about why. If you could explain that, if you were in a classroom, could you explain why? Okay, so many people are choosing 3, 4, 2, 1. And let's take a look at how it would play out. Let's put the next slide up. Okay. And indeed it is. It's 3, 4, 2, 1. Now, there's not a lot here. There's not a lot of language here, and this could be a compelling resource for students at a fundamentals level, at a beginning level. And what's really nice is that it gives an opportunity for that justification piece. So we're not giving them a lot here, but we can give them that springboard into using language to justify their decisions and their thinking on this this little visual here. It could also be kind of a fun acting out thing, you know, and obviously not trying to hurt students, but as a way to play around with students. I want to just point out to you the website here at the bottom of the third and fourth panel. This is where we can locate this, and there are others that are like this at this site. This is not the only one that's been produced by these folks. So a nice, compelling visual that students will be able to justify and to work with and to have fun with language. And again, onomatopoeic language, so you're getting that wham, which students might enjoy you know, learning and playing around with. Let's see a variation on this. Okay, so the variation can be as simple as making it an information gap, a real strict information gap, so that students are going to each get one of these and not the other, and not going to see any of the others, they're only going to see their own. And if they're only seeing their own, then they have to do the same thing. They have to put them in the correct order, or a justifiable, conceivable order that makes sense, that has a flow to it. And so you could ask students to take their image, or their image and their text. It could be any one of these comics you could cut up, you could play around with. And you could ask them to, without showing each other, without looking at anyone else's, to come up with the correct order, to come up with a conceivable order of which box comes first, and then to lay them out. This could be done with images or images and words. This is, once again, you're giving students a small, tactile, hands-on piece, and they are then taking that, and so all of these activities are doing that for you. You are not giving them a lot, but what you're getting from them linguistically and cognitively is a lot. That's the key there. So that's that communicative classroom. The teacher input is that springboard for rich, meaningful interaction with the target language, and that it's not just teacher-dominated teacher talk, but it's students working with and trying to create meaning, trying to have that authentic communication, which mimics what they can do in their home language. So you can imagine very easily taking something like this, or like the one that we saw earlier, and having an information gap where they would, each one of them would describe what they're seeing and then try to understand what order to put it into. And this can be done in class, and I think it's a nice way of getting at authentic speech in the classroom. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about removing word. We're at the word level for much of this so far. The idea of removing one word or one or two words. And let's go on. Let's look at the sentence level. So another possibility is we could require students or take out an entire character's dialogue. So not just on one word, but maybe 10 words or 5 words, and that they have to then create the bubble that has been blanked out there. And so students could do this once again individually or in pairs or as a group. So it's a communicative activity in the target language. It promotes pragmatic intelligence because you're also looking for appropriate responses and correct responses, and so that there's a connection between the two characters that are being spoken in the strip. Let's take a look at one of them as well. We can see this as an opportunity for writing activity. Once again, we're seeing Calvin here on the left speaking, and on the right now we're looking at his friend Hobbs, and I mentioned him earlier. This is his stuffed tiger who comes to life with him. So once again, a cat. And this cat is inanimate when he's with other people besides Calvin. But when he's with Calvin, he's alive. So he says, if you could wish for anything, what would it be? And then you can see we have a slightly perplexed, befuddled look on the face of the little boy here. And he is now responding with this blank. And look at what you're giving students here. You're asking them for not very much language, a couple of sentences, one sentence to answer, and you're giving them that visual scaffold into the activity, as opposed to, imagine you say to students, write me an essay where you describe what you wish for. That's not a lot of scaffold in there. There's not a lot of access point for students to be successful. We're looking to increase and to up the ante for student success, and therefore we should be giving them that access point in so that they can then create the language. And when you see something like this, you have an access point, and you're also conveying to students that it doesn't have to be a lot of writing. You can give me one sentence, and that's an opportunity to do that. So this is that springboard into authentic communication, authentic language in the classroom through a scaffold, through this visual. Let's take a look at the remainder of the strip right now. And you could see these first two boxes are the ones we've already seen. And he says, a big sunny field to be in. And the boy, Calvin, does not like this response. This response to him is stupid. You have that now, think big, riches, power, pretend you could have anything. And then the tiger is now sleeping, as cats tend to do, and he says it's hard to argue with somebody who looks so happy. Now, this could be just a great opportunity for classroom discussion, for classroom writing opportunities. I mean, we have some really larger ideas on here. And this is the idea of, if you could wish for something, are you going to wish for power, or is what's important the here and now, what you have, and maybe your health, and being able to sit in a field in the sun with the sun on your face? What's really important? That's the question of this strip. Excuse me. So we have a very nice opportunity here for writing, for discussion in the classroom, with just a little box strip of 4 boxes, perhaps 15, 20 words in here, and we're having an opportunity, this springboard, for students to talk about something that's important to them, about what's important in their lives, what would they wish for if they could have anything, and why. As opposed to getting students into groups and saying, now, talk about what you could wish for if you could have anything in the world. You could do that and it could be successful, but this gives you at least another opportunity to make it even more successful. I want to draw your attention to the website down at the bottom here. This is Calvin and Hobbes, spelled out and, again, .wordpress.com, and there are others that are there on this. This is the specific website for this strip, I Could Wish for Anything. I encourage you to take advantage of these kinds of things on the web. Okay, I think we could also get at pragmatic intelligence with this and appropriate responses. Let's talk about that for just a few seconds if we can. Promote L2 acquisition of pragmatic intelligence, that what should we be saying when somebody asks us something. So let's look at this strip here, and that the next one is a very similar kind of idea. It's a very basic human communication, very one-on-one communication, where you are seeing what people might say when they say, in some ways, the most basic communication, how are you? It's again with the cartoon cat Garfield, and he's we're going to use this as for politeness and sarcasm. These are all parts of pragmatics. Pragmatics is the politeness piece, the humor piece, appropriate response piece. These are all pragmatics. And so he says hello, and the spider says, how's it going? And Garfield says, not bad. And then he takes the newspaper, and again we have the onomatopoeia, the snick. And then he asks yourself, which is perfectly acceptable colloquial English, right? All you have to do is use that one word with the rising intonation and the question mark, the yourself. How are you? Means how are you? Or how are you doing? And so we are seeing with this a very simple exchange, and it's a way for students to get at that intercultural communication, that pragmatic intelligence. And so what would you say? What would the spider say back to him? What would the spider say to Garfield? What would what would the response be back to him? Maybe you could try to type in these a few of these, and see what you use your typing fingers in there to see what might be an appropriate response to that. My life is pretty flat nowadays. That's great. Or someone says squash. Or and somebody says, what does it look like, jerk? Okay. So yeah, very bad, or it could be better. Yeah, all of these are appropriate. I'm feeling a little flat, very nice. Had better days, excellent, right? Exactly. So again, we're going on with the same reduced speech. So had better days, or I've been better, I'm a little down, or I feel tired. These are all appropriate responses, and you're giving those students that visual scaffold into that appropriate response. And let's just see what he says. I've been better. Yeah. So again, you're getting at reduced speech. You're getting at, I've been better. You're getting at very colloquial, reduced speech there. How's it going? Again, with the contractions and the reduced speech. I think students would see that. Students would see this as a valuable resource for them to acquire this language and to be getting access to that colloquial language, that everyday authentic communication. I want to draw your attention to Garfield.com again down here. Okay. All right. Good. So let's take. Let's see what the next slide says. Yeah. So there was a question about pragmatic intelligence. Pragmatic intelligence, pragmatics is, as I said, about politeness. It's about humor, and so when we are able to understand jokes and when we're able to convey jokes in the target language, that's an indicator of pragmatic intelligence. Appropriate responses to compliments and to things of that nature, of sarcasm. These are all indicators of pragmatic intelligence with students. Very high level, very hard to get at in classrooms. And so something like an appropriate response or a sarcastic response like we saw in this is an example of a pragmatic intelligence from students. These are higher level thinking skills, and so these are all kind of analysis and evaluation, which is what we're really shooting for in our classrooms. Let's take a look at another possibility, and this other possibility might be something that we can do in our class. We've talked about this a little bit before, the idea of sequencing and prediction. Prediction is another high-level cognitive skill, and that if we're looking at getting students to predict the action or an appropriate response, the sequence of a strip, and most comics are going to be the ones that we've been looking at least are panels, and so you have multiple panels, and these panels are opportunities for students to as we've seen, play around in the sequencing opportunities, the jigsaw possibilities. I think all of these are really terrific opportunities for us to get at that target language, that communication in the classroom. So we could ask students again at the discourse level, at the sentence level, to write the missing panel. This can be done in groups, and so let's take a look at one of these right now. This is another famous American comic strip. Maybe some of you have seen this one yourselves. Maybe you've seen others of these, but this strip has been in circulation in the U.S. Newspapers for onwards of 50 years, probably. So a long time it's been around, and you'd be hard pressed to find too many Americans who are not familiar with this strip. This is very, very famous. And so what we have here, let's just take a minute to look at it and to read it. We have this little girl here on the left. Her name is Lucy, and this is her brother, Linus. And he's watching TV, obviously. And they're part of a group of kids. There are other kids as well. And what might you imagine that the little boy could say back to his sister? She says, "Have you been using my crayons?" "Why, yesterday I borrowed." "Why, yes, yesterday I borrowed them. I drew some pictures." "Well, where's the blue one?" "The blue is gone. What happened to the blue?" And what's his response? Let's see what people might say for this. Someone wrote down, "I ate it." Great, right. Someone said about their dress and making the connection with her dress there. "I had an accident. I was drawing the sea. The sky was so gray yesterday. The blue was on vacation." So all of these are really terrific responses that he might be saying to her. He might say that blue is his favorite color. He might, and this would be getting at really nice idiomatic speech, would be he could be saying to her in this box something about I'm feeling depressed or I was feeling down, because when we say I'm feeling blue, we are conveying that we're depressed. So that's a idiomatic expression in English. I'm blue or I'm feeling blue. This means that you're not feeling very happy. And so maybe that's what he's saying. I was feeling depressed or I'm not happy these days. And so we're giving students the opportunity for all of that creation in that little box there. And then we could then, as you can see, he says, I drew a lot of skies. Okay, so he said he was into drawing skies yesterday. And so obviously the sky is blue. And you've got that, but you could also imagine, this is how this strip came out, but you could also imagine that she gets a response back to him. And her response could be this. Now, this is not how it appeared when it was printed, but you could create this little extra box that comes out, and she is speaking to him. It's the same box that's here. It just takes this little thing, comes out of his mouth, and shifts it over to her. And you create your own opportunity for students to respond. And so what might she say to him? You know, what are some of the possibilities that she could then get into with him? What would that be? We want to try some of those. So, yeah, she could say, if somebody said, get me a new one. She might say, draw more clouds. She might say, broaden your horizons, you know, try another option, you know, try the sun as well. The sky isn't always blue. Sometimes the sky is gray. So opportunities for her to play around with language and having your students play around with language with this. So, good. You can see that we could get this at the discourse level. We can get this at sentence level. We could get students playing around with language. We could get this acting out. Students might relate to this, just like they could relate to little Calvin and Hobbes of the boy waiting on the side of the street. They might relate because they have siblings of their own. They have a brother or sister who might take their things or borrow their things or use their things without their permission. And what might that look like in a classroom for a role play, for example? So there's lots of things that you could do with this in your classroom. Again, and this is the message of this presentation, I'm hoping that you understand, is that you can give students lots of opportunities to take off with the target language, to play with the target language, to use in your classrooms when you bring in the right kinds of materials, these small-scale materials that can give you lots of payout on your usage. And so they're giving you lots of benefits without tremendous teacher talk or teacher presentation. This is an opportunity for them to manipulate and for them to create. So we are looking at target language culture as well in this presentation. We want to talk about ways that we can increase students' target language competence, their intercultural competence, and so how might that play out here? And that's an opportunity for us to look at how comics can oftentimes be culturally embedded. And when we get later on, we'll look at an editorial cartoon site, which is an opportunity for us as well to bring this into our classrooms. So let's take a look at this next one right here. This is target language culture, and this is a U.S. target language culture, I could have said with this slide. So we have here a little visual. Take a minute to just look at this for a second, please. And you can see what you might get out of this. You get a little visual here, and I'm asking you to fill in the blank on the right here. I see somebody saying not a soccer player, not a football fan, somebody wrote, a watcher, somebody wrote, not a football fan, not a soccer fan, not a soccer fan. Good, excellent. So what you're seeing, many of you are understanding the repetition of this phrase, not a football player, not a football player, not a football goal. So this is during the World Cup, and this is an American here sitting in his chair. He's sleeping, he's not interested, his mouth is open, And this would allow us an opportunity to get into a nice conversation with students where we would be looking at what does this mean? This is an interesting American phenomenon that we're a country that is less interested than many others in this game. This is it also gets at the interplay of the words football here, which is not what we would call this in the United States, right? This would be called something different. It'd be called soccer, and but called football everywhere else, obviously. And here you see this American guy sitting in his chair, snoozing away. And what might that box say? Yes, many of you came up with this one as well. So not a soccer fan. Now this is an opportunity for us to engage with target language culture in our rooms and to talk about sports that are interesting for some people and not others, why Americans may be somewhat less interested in soccer than other countries or much less interested in it. And maybe we can also use this as an opportunity to talk about American football, which is a different game entirely, which is what this man is interested in. Because if you look closely, you see that he's sitting on a chair which is emblazoned with footballs, American footballs, which are not these things, which are American soccer balls. So an opportunity to play around with American culture and to look at this as an opportunity for us to engage and to use it as a discussion or as a writing activity. Okay. Comics can do lots of other things for us. So we could be looking at comics as places for student generation. Students could be generating these comics themselves. They don't have to be given the comics. They could draw them. They could write them. They could be doing these in pairs. They could be, many of us in our classrooms might be using reading activities. And so this might be a nice opportunity for us to do a visual representation of the story that you're looking at in class or the news story. I have, with students, had them read news stories, short news stories from a newspaper, and they are then asked to draw out the narrative from that news story. So a lot of times news stories are very linear. They're who and what and when and why. And so this lends itself as well to a visual representation. So can you then draw out what you've read? This is a reading comprehension assessment measure if you want it to be. And so how well are students understanding what they're reading? And you're getting at multiple types of intelligences as well there. You're getting students to take in something, to read it, to understand it, and then visually represent it. That's very high cognitive load, and it's a really good linguistic, it's pure student creation. It's completely student generated. They may then retell their comics to their partners, which is also student generated. So you've gone from a student created comic that they've read something, then they're going to draw it out, and then they might retell it so it becomes a spoken as well as a listening activity. So you have the listening and speaking student generated as well right there. And as we saw, and I would encourage you, if you were to do something like this, to make this a student generated student reader writer pairs, so that the students are not necessarily working alone. This is going to increase your target language usage with students working together. I would encourage you to utilize some of the websites that we've looked at already on the Ning. In particular, Make Believe Comics comes to mind for this. And so students do not have to be literally drawing this. They could be creating these comics from a site like Make Believe Comics and then taking that anxiety-producing piece, the drawing part, and you're eliminating it. Students are seeing that as a pure fun activity, that there's no opportunities for them to feel anxiety about the fact that they cannot draw. So we would do something like this, and this gets at lots of good language in your classroom. Right there. Students could then act out these comics. I mean, clearly comics are a way for us to get into role plays. They are usually one or two characters in there, and so you can be having students retelling or acting out the comic with or without the visuals. It comes into prediction skills, and so they're negotiating this. You're getting multiple ways of bringing in comics into your classroom that that students will enjoy and that give you, all that authentic language that you're looking at there. I think the role play, the acting out piece is a crucial give me out of comics, that you shouldn't just use comics as a reading, writing activity, but much more as a springboard into role plays and to acting out, because students will see that as a natural connection. And it's also going to give you that students disassociated from the I, from themselves, which is going to reduce their anxiety, which is going to make them freer and more easier access into the target language, so that they're no longer who they are, but they might be a character, and that character is easier to make mistakes and etc. and to grow with the language. Let's talk about why we use comics. A little repetition here, a little recap as we pull towards the end of the presentation. The last bit of the presentation, we'll talk about the fact that comics are going to give us all four skills. That they're not just a reading, writing activity, which is what they appear. I mean, this is what they're mostly, look like to us. Right? They look like a reading and they look like a literacy activity, but they can also be a listening, speaking activity. We could use them for listening and speaking when we incorporate drama. We could use them as listening and speaking when students are going to read their comics aloud. We could certainly use them as a writing activity. These are springboard into reading and writing, all sorts of ways. And we're getting at this through very small chunks of language that then students are using to create their own with. So there's a 4 skills component to all of this, as well as a promotion of print literacy. So for students who are pre-literate, or students who are coming from a different literacy tradition, where perhaps they might be reading from right to left as opposed to left to right, you get the sequencing piece involved. You get, you can use this as an opportunity to talk about thought bubbles versus dialogue bubbles. Lots of punctuation. Many of us have taught punctuation in our classes. And so why are certain punctuation marks being utilized and not others? And then we can use comics as a way to promote and to further our teaching of punctuation in the classroom. So I would encourage that, as well as looking at the difference between italicizing or bold-facing or underlines and different kinds of fonts. All of these things are readily involved with comics, when printed comics. And so I'm going to encourage you to utilize these. This is mining everything that's in there and using this as an opportunity for us to get at that print literacy piece when we're using comics in our classroom. So in addition, we've talked a little bit about assessment. I want to just go over this for just one slide right now. As I mentioned earlier, assessment is a good assessment in a language classroom, as we know, is embedded, it's tied in, it's intricate. It's not teach and then test 10 days later, or teach and then test a day later, or you're teaching and you're assessing at the same time. That your assessment piece is always wrapped up within your teaching piece, so that you're looking for opportunities of assessing how well students are doing. And then if you have a rubric, well, you've got a grade. So you can do something with that assessment at all times with your classroom. And you're seeing, for example, a close activity, right? And that you don't even need a rubric for that. That's just a simple correct answer, or a range of correct answers. Like for the first one with the Garfield, if you were teaching adjectives and they had an adjective in there like freezing or chilly or cold, that's correct. And so you're using them as an opportunity for oral assessment. Maybe they're acting these out, or they're discussing these. You could be using them for dictation. They could be a focused writing assignment, very short scale writing assignment. You could do, when we're looking at assessment, sometimes we want to isolate the skills. And so we're looking, for example, to have an authentic test of speaking, and that requires that we pull out all of the other features. We can't have students read and speak because you're teaching reading, you're testing reading and speaking. You want to isolate just the skill that you need to test. And so, for example, you could give students a visual, a comic without any words, and ask them to tell you what's going on there. That's an authentic, real assessment of speaking. You have no contamination from the other skills going on there. Conversely, you could have students give you just that one skill by writing, so that they're looking at the visual and they are not doing any kind of reading, but they're going to fill in the correct bubbles. And so this is going to be an authentic test of writing. It's not going to be influenced by their reading skills or their listening skills. It's going to be just that one skill set. So I encourage you to see that comics can be 4 skills and assessment features, that they are all wrapped up together there, that they're really a nice tight bundle that you can use in your classrooms. They are, of course, going to be adaptable for different ages and abilities. We've spent a lot of our time today looking at the second bullet here, cartoons, single panel and multiple panel. But it's much more than that as well. We could be talking about wordless books, comics books, graphic novels. All of these are possibilities. Students could be following a daily comic strip. Many of these strips that we looked at today produce a daily comic strip online, and if you have access to the internet in your classrooms or in your home, you could bring these into students and allow them to follow these strips. These strips have a set number of characters, and so in some ways it's like following a television show, so that the same characters are engaging in different kinds of activities. Graphic novels and comic books, they're similar, but they're distinctly different. I mean, I think we are probably more familiar with comic books. These, I think they have a reputation as being strictly for kids, but comic books can also be things that adults can use. And a lot of times when we're looking at comic books and they have a more of an adult flavor to them and they're longer and they're more complex, they kind of they change into a graphic novel. There's a fine line, a fine distinction between the two of these, but graphic novels can be, and they certainly are having their moment now in the world at large, they can be much more complex, and they are visual representations of novels. And so that sounds what it sounds like. It's a graphic representation of a story, similar to a comic book, but perhaps much more for an adult audience. I just added to the Ning this afternoon before this presentation a link, an Amazon link for graphic novels and an Amazon link for wordless books. And so I encourage you to look at my post on the Ning, and you can see what wordless books are. They're what they sound like. These are picture books without words, and giving you the opportunity of having students add in the dialogue and adding in the text, and quite sophisticated, quite wonderful opportunities to use these. There's some really famous good ones out there. And the Amazon link that I gave you, you can see what they are, and you can use them. Graphic novels are the same thing. These are going to be in some ways the opposite end of the spectrum. They are heavy on the text as well as the visual, and they're a way for students to get into a text and quite nice. So I have a poll question here. How many of you have read a graphic novel? How many people have actually looked at one of them? Oh, wow. Lots of people have done it. Excellent. Wow. So lots of people are very familiar with graphic novels. That's really nice. If you're not, I encourage you to look at the Amazon link that I posted under the additional resources and check that out and see if there's a way for you to bring graphic novels into your room. I noticed when I was looking at that something perhaps new is taking novels and making them into graphic novels. And so something that had been strictly a text novel is now becoming kind of a graphic novel. So you have visual representation along with the existing text, and that's quite exciting. So a high percentage of people have used no graphic novels, looked at them, and I'm happy to see that. So I encourage you to take that into your room if you can. And follow a strip, follow a cartoon. Good. So let's take a look at some of the advantages. Well, slides on advantages is just a recap on our last couple of slides here, and then we'll look at some resources. I hope we all believe that they're fun, that they're motivating, that they're interesting for students. They're all of those things wrapped up into a nice, tight little package. They're an opportunity to bring in the target language culture, to increase pragmatic intelligence, to give us opportunities to use real-world language in our classroom, student-directed, student-centered speech, It's authentic. It's there for you. And nowadays, with the beauty of the internet, there's a lot of opportunities to get those and use them at a very current rate. So as well as doing all of those things, it promotes L2 negotiation of meaning, the communication back and forth. Students are able to see these things, these 4 skills, all wrapped up together. That creativity piece. Students are creating comics. They're working at that visual representation. They are being independent thinkers. There's diversity of opinions. All of these things are coming into play in a good communicative classroom in this kind of situation. So I encourage you to see them as all wrapped up there, as giving you all of these things: 4 skills, creativity, student-centered, student-directed classrooms. We should also get drawbacks. Drawbacks, everything's got drawbacks. This is not a perfect classroom activity. There are things that might be problematic for you as a teacher with this, and the most obvious drawback is that it's not perceived as serious, not necessarily by you, but by others who may be important to you, people who you work for, or the parents of the students that you're working with, or perhaps the students themselves. So we need to remember that not everyone will have as much buy-in to this as you, or you might believe in it, and your job to counterbalance that lack of seriousness, perception of lack of seriousness, is to have buy-in, to believe in it yourself, to understand why we use comics in the classroom, the benefits of them, to understand what it is that we're getting out of them. And so then you have that knowledge, and then you convey that knowledge to the people that you are working with, the people you're working for, the parents, the students. So it's important, that key piece there is that you believe in this. If you believe in this, and if you know why, you're the expert, you're the teacher, you're the language teacher, you have the background, the knowledge, and you have 35 slides before this that help you feed into that answer of why do we use comics in the classroom? What are we getting out of this? So you need to understand what that is if you do get pushback, so that you can sell it to folks, so that folks will see the benefit of it as well as you seeing the benefit of it. Okay. And I'm sure we could come up with a few other drawbacks, but I think that's the key one that we should be aware of and trying to counterbalance. Okay, I want to get into some resources at the end here, and I think that's the way we'll end it this afternoon. I want to talk about 3 web resources and then some literature resources, okay? Excuse me. The first web resource is something that's on the Ning, and this is Make-Believe Comics. There was an article on the Ning that you read from, or you were given from Bill Zimmerman, who created Make-Believe Comics. And this is a very dynamic and interesting website that gives you access into using comics in your classroom. The Association of American Editorial Cartoonists gives you the editorial cartoons for current events that we looked at. We looked at the soccer one. And then the New Yorker magazine, which is a magazine here in the United States that you may or may not be familiar with, that runs a weekly caption contest for their cartoons. So a way for you to bring those into your classroom. Let's take a look at these. Make-Believe Comics. This has been on the web since 2010, something like that, 2009, 2010. I've used this with lots of teachers over the years, and teachers have used it with their students. I think this is just a real nugget of gold here for you, and really could be mined by you, the teacher, to bring into your classroom as a way of promoting language and doing all of the things that we've been talking about in a very nice, sophisticated, good-looking package. So obviously we're looking at screenshots here. We can't look at the website, but you can go to the website on your own. And one of the things you get on this website is you will get, and I'm just trying to pull the pointer, you'll get characters. And there's something, I created this I created this comic myself on the website. And so we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different characters that are, I'm not able to move the pointer. You can see here the first one, the far left. Yeah, there we are. The far left, this is one of the 20 or so different characters that are on the website that you could choose from, and they can be changed, so their facial expressions change. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sites, characters. And as I wrote here, Make Believe Comics, this is me writing. I wrote this when I created this comic. Make Believe Comics can be is a terrific site. It's loaded with great free resources for the language classroom, and I really want to draw your attention to this 4-letter word here. This is the best 4-letter word that we come up with in this slide. This is free. All of this is free, free, free. And that's, you can't understate that for a site that is this good, and that they're giving this away, that you get this opportunity to print and to email and to create and to have students working together in pairs. This is a lot for no money, and I would really encourage you to look at that. You could add backgrounds. You could say students can type their own words into these boxes. And you get the color here, little raindrops, and the thought bubble versus the dialogue bubble here. You could have more than one talking to each other. There's just so much in here, and you can play around with this endlessly on your own, and it's just something that's great out there for you to take advantage of as a language teacher and bring it to your classrooms. So do so, please. Okay. Couple more sites before we end up this afternoon. American Editorial Cartoonist. This is they run a caption contest, and you could see the caption right here. Students can enter these caption contests. Your students can all over the world can write a little caption in and submit it as an appropriate caption, just like we've done today for this. And how much fun would that be for students to be submitting to a U.S. website a potential caption winner? And so there's also, this website is full of classroom activities and classroom usages. And I want to just pull back to the slide before this and say that when you go to Make Believe Comics, and not just are you creating, but you should scroll down to the bottom of the home page, and there's a little tab that says For Teachers, full of information, just chock full of information, articles, resources, lesson plans. You don't have to create the wheel there. It's all given to you with what to do with this site. So I would really encourage you to hit that For Teachers tab. Same thing for this site. There's a For Teachers tab, For Educators tab on this site that also gives you lots of access into how to bring these into your classrooms. And if you're teaching U.S. culture, this is an opportunity to bring in current events that are very current, right there in the moment. The New Yorker Caption Contest, also weekly. They have so it goes over a 3-week span. So the first week they'll give you a cartoon like this one here without a caption. So the object is to produce a caption or something that goes underneath this cartoon. And so you're getting just the visual representation here, just the visual, and you're asking students to create a caption. And students can do this in class. They could create captions, and they could decide on which one is the best or the most appropriate caption for this. And if we had more time, we could do that. So you can look at all the things. They're sitting here in a restaurant with menus, but at the same time, they're sitting in front of a stove, right, or on top of a stove. That's obviously kind of nonsensical, but what could the caption be for that? This happened a couple of weeks ago. This was in the magazine, and I took a photograph of it. That's what this is. And then the next week, they had the finalists, what they call the finalists, and these are these 3 right here. And these are submitted by folks in the United States. Your students, if they're outside of the United States, cannot submit to this. I don't know why, but they can still vote on the ones, and they could do a classroom version of the caption contest. They could produce their own captions, or they could simply vote on which one of these they think is the best. And then next week, if you look at the New Yorker Caption Contest website, you'll see the one that was the winner. That's a nice 3-part multi-step linguistic load. It's just a great activity that you could be playing around with students on a weekly basis. I encourage you to do that. All right, the last two slides are selected literature, and there's lots more out there besides what I've given you. I've given you what I think are some really good reading opportunities for this. Some old ones. I mean, this goes back, 30 plus years, but it's a kind of a very well-known seminal. It's early on, and it's got lots of stuff that's still current and still important. To more recent ones as well, and you will see as well that there's a TESOL Quarterly article from 2004. So if you're interested in this field, if you want more scholarly backup to using this and reasons, and other than the forum article which I gave you, which is a very nice article, if you haven't had an opportunity to look at that, do so, please. That forum article has some of the same ideas that I've talked about today, and there are others as well, and that's available to you online through the website. And I would encourage you to read that or any of these other articles that are out there. And the most important thing is to take this opportunity to get into the classroom with these. Check out the Ning, where I've given you some additional resources beyond the ones that are up here. And thank you so much for, we're just running out of time here. I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to come out this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on what it is where you are. And hopefully learning and finding a way to bring comics into your classroom to the benefit of your students. Thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, James, for that great webinar. We appreciate that you introduced us to all of these techniques and activities for bringing both the fun and learning-oriented possibilities of comics for the EFL classroom. So I'm sure all of our viewers out there are joining me now in giving you a big round of applause. To our viewers, thank